with that, we'll move to our next, which is the last session of the day, which is going to be the panel discussion. And the topic of the panel is another interesting one: can't see the forest for the trees. And again, this is something which has got a Dutch version as well, and as well as the English version, where we find that many times in the race to acquire technology, quite often organizations forget the purpose why they exist, the impact that they're trying to drive socially, and get lost in the social in the technology space. And I will be joined for this particular roundtable with three esteemed panelists. So first of all, we have Shayonti Chatterji. She is the founder of a company called Medley. She's going to talk about Medley shortly. I've known her for years. Again, very passionate person, strongly believes in the social impact side of things, and also wears a corporate hat as well. The second person we have is David Lyon, again, somebody that I've known for a number of years as well. He is the technical director at ImpactAgri. He's done tons of work in the global south, as Dimple put it, in the emerging markets of Africa. He's going to share his journey and stories. And finally, we have Kasey Beck, who is the co-founder of something called Village Bookbinders. Very, very interesting concept. And we actually connected on LinkedIn first. And then when he explained the idea of what he's trying to do, I think it definitely has strong resonance with Dimple's presentation on education. So with that, I would like to welcome upon our three esteemed panelists, Shayonti, David, and Kasey Beck. So Shayonti, you're on first. So I think you need to switch on the videos.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll start with a little about myself. Of course, Anirvan has given the initial introduction. I started my career in sales operations, and over time moved into business development. After having worked in Russia and Hungary for almost 9 years, I came to the Netherlands in 2003, and that's where my entrepreneurial journey started. When me, along with my two other business partners, we were given the opportunity to start up the European distribution for an American skincare line. It was, I know the connotation associated with skincare is obviously a bit frivolous, but what was unique about this line was the founder of the skincare company questioned the cosmetic industry for all the ridiculous claims it made. And it was that which really interested us to take upon this brand. Finally, when this brand was sold off, we exited. And I was trying to see where I could fit in. Having been an entrepreneur for over 15, 16 years, it was difficult to get back to a 9-to-6 job. And I had this sort of a bug in my head that I had to do something, create something, and make at least a small difference in this world that we are living. And that's when the idea of Urban Medley came up. There are many platforms similar to Urban Medley these days, but how I wanted to differentiate via my platform was that I wanted to reintroduce the traditional forms of printing, weaving, which is considered absolutely wonderful coming out of India, my home country, but give it a global flair so that it is more appealing and interesting for the global consumer. And as a brand, I wanted to work only with sustainable fabrics and sustainable material. So at the moment, we are still structuring ourselves. Obviously, we started at the beginning of this year, which was not the best time to start. So the takeoff has been very rough. Having said that, we are really learning. We are trying to sort of put the whole structure in a much more sort of meaningful place so that we can genuinely impact the artisans, the designers, the people we are working with, and at the same time make the venture profitable. So that's about it. I'm based in Amsterdam, and we are trying to promote our products all over Europe and the world at large. Yeah.
Thank you, Shayonti. Let's welcome David Lyon.
Hi. Hello. So my background is I've worked for a couple of decades initially with major corporations on how they integrate sustainability into their supply chains, technology, innovation practices, and particularly in the food and agricultural space, and was aware, as many people I'm sure on the call are, of some of the challenges around the yield gaps we see, particularly in countries of the South, where you might have 15% yields compared to what you could achieve. The markets, many farmers unable to access some of the markets. And I've worked under various different hats, initially with development organizations, and the challenge there is how sustainable are the efforts and the scalability. Working with tech firms, where often the focus is on one specific challenge, and it can be quite fragmented. And with investors, where the challenge of getting the need to work at a certain scale often doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. So ImpactAgri has been around for 5 years or so, and we work to integrate both bringing in some of the leading technology and approaches and practices on the supply side, and also linking that with some of the demand on the market side. So we act as a principal and a project developer, bringing full value chains together. And a core part of our work is around the outcomes on social impact and on environmental benefits, which apart from being the right thing to do, it also means that our businesses are able to be inclusive and able to operate at scale in the countries we work. Most of our activity is within sub-Saharan Africa, though we do some work in other regions as well. And we work extensively with a wide ecosystem of companies in individual countries, whether that's technology, whether it's finance, whether it's markets, etc., setting up particular special purpose vehicles depending on the crops we work, which are typically higher value crops, which benefit our partner farmers that we work with. Our focus is very much around creating a core farm, or training farm, which we can then use that as a basis to develop small scale enterprises around that. So it ties in with some of the things you've heard earlier today in coffee and other crops, and it's working at bringing together the key parties together in terms of our approach. So that's an overview of ImpactAgri.
Thanks, David, for that elaborate explanation. And now let's get Kasey Beck.
Yes, hello. I'm actually located in Provo, Utah, which is about an hour south of Salt Lake City. When I was going to college, I actually served a short mission for my church, and I served in Holland. And I got to know a lot of Africans, and I just fell in love with Africa in general. Had a lot of friendships, and that combined with being a political science major in college really influenced my passion for wanting to help out those those that are located in areas in which there's a lot of widespread poverty. Excuse me. So being a college student, being a poor college student, and not having a whole lot of money, there wasn't much I feel like that I could actually do to help Africa. But in 2011, talking with some friends in Africa, we actually started an online program where we worked with kids and students in Uganda, and we basically helped them with their English communication skills, with math and science. And in 2014, after we saw the results of just a consistent mentoring program, we decided to become a full-fledged nonprofit. In 2017, 2020, we saw that we can't just do an online mentoring. We also have to help schools in which it's actually schools primarily that we set up a program. But we saw that we couldn't just do an online mentoring. We also had to help with the infrastructure, such as building classrooms, providing libraries and computer labs. And so that's where we are now, helping. We work with partner schools in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And we basically set up an online mentoring program so that the kids in these classrooms can receive more quality education and that they can better understand and grasp the actual concepts that they're learning in school. And so that's kind of what we're about. And right now we're mentoring about 1,000 students weekly. So we have about 9 or 10 programs that we have established in mostly in Africa. But with these programs, we're providing this quality education on a weekly basis and helping the kids do better with their schooling. And it's been able to have a real good impact upon on their test scores and advancing to higher secondary school.
Thanks, Kasey, for the introduction. So with that, let's get started with our roundtable. So the topic is "Can't see the forest for the trees," and again, because you guys have some exposure, some experience in some cases, and a lot of exposure, a lot of experience in case of David, I guess, with respect to social impact. What is it when it comes to the convergence of technology and social impact? What's your perspective? What's driving it? Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about the can't see the forest for the trees.
If you don't mind, I'll start. So in 2011, I had friends about us, bringing technology into the classroom in Africa, and they thought that we were crazy because they didn't think that there would be a reliable internet connection, hard to get computers in schools. But we just started, and we didn't wait. We didn't do a whole lot of research. We just started somewhere. And providing this technology in the classroom has made a tremendous impact. It's never a perfect connection, but even in the Western world, it's never a perfect connection. So, not waiting, but just starting somewhere, bringing technology. There's a lot more that can be done in the social impact space if technology is utilized.
Shayonti, how about you? What's your opinion, perspective on this one?
Well, I'll just start with a small story, and that is when I was trying to look for suppliers for my platform, a friend of mine sent me an image of a particular product and said that, if I was to buy from your platform, this is something I would buy. So I Googled the product out. I reached out to the supplier who was based in Delhi, and she was happy to work with us. So she said, yeah, okay, fine. This is something I can develop. And within a month, she sent me a prototype of the product. And that was coming from a farmer who cultivates Kala cotton in Gujarat, which is an absolutely desert area. And believe me, he was sending this picture from a village where I'll find difficult to spot it on the map. So he was sending us this little picture, little video kind of a thing from his fields, where how he was dyeing the threads and how he was ultimately weaving it. So sitting in Amsterdam, we said, yes, this is a good thing. And of course, the supplier, the designer in Delhi, she walked me through the process and what the product is. And we sealed the deal that this is a product we would be carrying. A month later, the same farmer sends me a little video how he is weaving the scarf, the stole on his handloom, which is situated in his little, like about a 30 square meter area, which he has. Now, if I take the technology out of it, I don't think there is any way in the world I could have got the product sitting in Amsterdam on a web platform. So I think this in itself answers the question that how important technology is even for such a traditional sector. I mean, I was absolutely amazed that that would be my level of communication with a farmer with probably limited knowledge of technology and education. So I think the story in itself just shows how important technology is to make the social impact that probably sustainable businesses like ourselves are trying to do, because there's just no way we could be working to do this. And I mean, who would have imagined that technology is going to wed into traditional forms of workmanship and traditional artisans in this way? And that the fact that they're adapting it and that is helping them to market themselves is, I think, a proof in itself.
I think that's a wonderful story, Shayonti. Thanks for sharing it. In fact, it reminds me of a story myself, which is so a few years back, and LB, who was there earlier in the day as one of the panelists,
Yeah.
he and I, we were working with a sugar cane or a sugar company, and we'd gone to this factory, which was in the sugar belt of India, but it was a remote area. So we visited the factory, and then we went back to the actual place where they had made provisions for us to sit kind of in an office. Very, very different setup in the office versus the factory itself. It was in the month of September, so it was still warm outside. And while we were talking about it, we were like, oh my, we had forgotten to take a few photographs of certain areas of the factory to show, especially the environment, health and safety aspect. And the guy who was sitting there, and typical sort of, we expected, kind of villager person. He says, no problem, we'll get you the photos, no worries. We're like, okay, so how is that going to happen? He takes out his phone from his pocket and calls up the guy, and within the next 10 minutes, we get photographs on WhatsApp, and this is something where for the first time I actually saw or got first-hand experience of, how tools and technology, simple tools like WhatsApp, are making a huge difference in the way we collaborate across the globe. So thanks for sharing that story, Shayonti. David, let's hear, I'm sure you have war chest of stories with your experience in Africa.
Yeah, so I guess the way we look at that sort of question is starting very much with mapping the value of a product, both and also the impact, both social, environmental, and see where things are broken or where particular groups of farmers could be vulnerable to environmental change, for example, or social change, and see how that compares against what we see as a benchmark elsewhere. So take an example as well. We work, one of our businesses working with shea butter in West Africa. And a lot of the value of the processing is captured in Western Europe, not in the countries and the women's groups that are collecting and the primary processing of the shea. The primary processing is using a lot of firewood, so there's an environmental angle there, which is quite a key issue. So we have a whole set of things that are not particularly satisfactory or that aren't satisfactory. And then we think about technology in terms of, we know how to do something. So how can we actually change this value chain in a way that is socially going to be transformative, but also commercially viable and therefore will last for a long time? So it's not the same as a donor sort of mentality. It's more of an inclusive business mentality. And and technology is a key part of those solutions. But those solutions can be quite simple, I think. There's quite a lot of work on the advanced technologies, but we also think of the simple things. So things like cold chain technology, or we work a lot with different forms of irrigation, where you provide all your inputs through very targeted approaches, and thinking about how can these technologies be integrated into a small scale farming system. So in West Africa, with the shea butter example, we're looking at processing using renewable energy technologies. We're looking at organization where much more of the processing can be done locally, and therefore you're able to to keep more of the value in country as one example, and you're not using the firewood. But that's just one example. Having the discussion we've had earlier about the role of digitization is key in terms of organizing and working with large numbers of farmers, which is a key part of the impact. And it's very right and proper that gets captured earlier, and we can talk about that a bit later. But those are some of the dimensions that we think about.
Excellent. I think this kind of nicely establishes the fact that you guys are you guys have the right expertise to talk about the topic itself. Now, what we've seen again from our own experience, as well as the feedback that we've got from the market, is often people who are kind of the middlemen, with respect to consulting on the technology side of things, would often come up with, and David, I'll probably start with you, is that it all of a sudden becomes, I don't want to name companies, but all of a sudden it becomes everything about technology and very little about the social impact, whether it's an IoT technology that you want to use or some sort of a software that you want to use. We absolutely know that in the digital age that we live in, technology has a big role to play, but it's not necessarily, over encompassing everything. So have you faced similar situations where it became just the technology talk and not as much the social impact talk that you wanted it to be?
I would, unfortunately, in the sector I work at, that's fairly dominant, in that a company that's working on irrigation will be selling an irrigation solution. A company selling fertilizer will think of it as a fertilizer problem, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the challenges is that many of these companies, these technologies, haven't been talking to each other. In reality, you need to integrate them together. And it's the people who are able, often the people who are working on the ground, but are able to scale up, are those that are able to think of it beyond a water problem, a fertilizer problem, et cetera, and think of it in terms of both the sort of production and the markets and bringing those together. There are a few instances where certain technologies are particularly attractive and people are looking, how can we apply it? But it's important to understand where it fits in the whole value chain. And there's quite a lot of work to be done working with each different player and how that sort of comes together. And that's a critical role of investors and is a key part of that. And also the partners on the ground and understanding the capability, but also the challenges of different technologies.
Excellent. Kasey, let's take your, let's say, application platform. And there is a technology part, and then there is a quality part of imparting that level of education. What are typically some of the technological challenges that you face, and what's the sort of also take on the level of the quality of education that gets important because in many of these economies or emerging market scenarios, it sometimes becomes a question of, I'm using internet to get education and therefore it must be good, versus I'm getting quality education because it comes from village book builders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of patience that's required of us. When we first start working with this school, often the headmaster lacks that technology know-how, and so to connect with them initially can be challenging. Fortunately, we've been able to work with a lot of teachers that have experience utilizing technology, getting onto Skype, how to start up a computer, and they're able to transfer those skills pretty easily to the headmaster. But we still have challenges with power outages, with not sufficient broadband internet. We have about 400 mentors, and these are all volunteers, and so in a given week there's a lot of challenges, but we preach patience often, and patience with technology is required, and fortunately it's worked out pretty well in that regard. As far as quality. So our KPIs are strictly based on the quality of the education. And so technology is just the means to bring about the education aspect of it. But with the KPIs, they're all focused on, you know, what tests are coming up, how to help the kids do better with their test scores. And so our KPIs really focus on what's most important.
Right, and you're kind of extending on that thought process on when it comes to the KPIs, because I'm assuming a lot of your volunteers are from the Western world, and a lot of the kids who are getting the education are in Africa. How do you ensure that it kind of ties into? I mean, is there like an alignment to the school curriculum, and that they need to learn about this, and therefore your volunteers need to sort of calibrate their own let's say content of education and method of education?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So for the volunteers, we do provide some training, and that training is focused more on the cultural aspect of mentoring, and you know, there's, you know, obviously there's some sensitivities that need to be in place as well. But when we work with a new school, we get the curriculum, and we try to implement that as closely as possible with you know, what we're familiar with in the Western world. But you know, one of our biggest KPIs is to help the kids with their English conversational skills. And if they have that, you know, probably more than doing well on a test, being able to fluently converse in English will help them achieve a higher income more than other aspects of it. And so one of our training points is to talk to our volunteers to encourage their students to communicate, to push them and get them out of their comfort zone.
Excellent. Shayonti, you know, so while your platform has a strong social impact angle, but there are lots of other people who are part of your ecosystem, who are part of this ecosystem. Do they believe as strongly in the social impact, or are they more concerned about the tactical, the technology side of things?
Well, you see, there is a strange trend, if I may use the word, we are seeing at the moment, especially in Europe. I do not know about the US. Is this sustainability is fashionable? Now that has some major issues, because often, you know, what is happening is the thing is getting a bit clouded, because people are saying, oh, cotton is sustainable. Oh, you know, hand weaving is sustainable. And at times you feel like the consumer who should be sort of be the driver in this whole understanding of sustainability is bit in the dark and is a bit clouded in its concept. Like, for example, I will again bring a very strange incident that I came across, and that is I was trying to work with a marketplace based in UK, and they wanted to have some behind the scene images of our artisans. So when I shared one picture with them where it shows a girl, she's sitting and doing her hand sketching on silk. This lady from the UK, she turns around and tells me, you know what, I don't know whether I want to work with you, because the surrounding this girl is in doesn't look comfortable enough, and I have a feeling that she's underage. Okay, so I said, you know, what for example, the main problem with her was that she was an advocate of sustainability, of helping artisans, but she had no idea about how this whole supply chain works. Because I explained to her that, you know, generally the way we as a curated platform, we work with designers. The designer explains to the artisan. The artisan takes the work home. It's like a homework, and they do it in their surrounding. I said, now, if the artisan is sending you the picture of her little village, yes, in a little hut they stay in, instead of appreciating the fact that our platform is enabling this person, this individual, allowing her to earn a living, you are getting into the nitty-gritty of how the image looks and if that photograph or the picture will really fit in. So, you know, the whole story somehow loses, the whole value is lost. So I think for me, what is very important is when we are looking at social impact technology, each and every stakeholder in this has to see the bigger picture, what we call as in helicopter view. And like I think David was referring to, of course, this is a more technology-oriented business, that you need to understand exactly how the chain is working and not just see one aspect of it. That, oh, we are wearing sustainable. No, if you're wearing cotton, it is not sustainable. It is one of the most polluting fabric that is there. There are only few varieties of cotton which are genuinely sustainable and friendly with the environment. So I think what I see is a lot of still lack of awareness as far as the technology comes, the inability of the technology to translate to the grassroots level so that it can really be used by the person at the grassroots, and from the consumer perspective, or the buyers or people like us who are facilitating this whole thing, there is some kind of a sort of a cloud or some kind of an haziness when they are unable to see the whole picture. Because I feel social impact and technology can only work when you really see the whole picture at one go. You understand the entire chain and how it is working. So, you know, you just have some fancy technology and you have decided as the creator of that it is going to have a social impact is definitely not enough. You have to communicate, and the person at the lowest level has to understand. I think that's where the success lies of the technology. You know, we can talk of very fancy technologies, but if it is not understood and it is really not making the impact it was supposed to make, I think something is lost in translation.
You've raised a very, very important point. And I think, David, you wanted to say something, right?
And I just sort of building on that, I think the whole point of sustainability as a trend, I see quite a lot in my area, but also in adjacent sectors as well. A lot of companies putting the stamp of the SDGs on their products, talking about what inputs they're putting in, not really talking about the real outcomes for people's lives. And that's and we heard that on the previous presentation about the importance of looking at outcomes. The same applies in my world of food and agriculture, and I'm sure applies in other areas as well, which is particularly important.
Yeah, and I think you know, absolutely. And in fact, what we often find, and this is a conflict that I've been discussing with many people, which is essentially around creating a social impact and yet making money, you know, which is like a commercial venture versus you know, trying to toe the line with SDG principles and ticking the boxes. And in fact, strangely enough, what we find, especially when projects need deep investments or large-scale investments, and when I say large-scale investment, they're still small, micro level investments, but for the areas or the locations, it still is a big investment. I still find there is a lot of rigidity, a lot of ticking the boxes, and you know, making sure that you have the right metrics in place, that you're capturing the right thing, etc., etc. It all often becomes all about the governance and all about ticking the boxes and all about making sure that you've got the right parameters in place versus the social impact. And I'm going to come back to the example that Shayonti talked about in just a minute. But staying with the governance and the KPIs and you know, the usage of technology, etc. How you know, what's your take, David, on this one?
In terms of, I'm certainly working with our investors. There's certainly an element of sort of behavior like lemmings, of people will follow when they've seen it proven, and then a resistance to be obviously the first mover. And we can't, if you are looking at developing some of the apps and things you might see in other sectors where you release something, you're improving it on an ongoing basis, and that's the way you get your development costs down. In agriculture, it doesn't really work that way, and you need to have a way for pre-funding and be able to think of the whole of the wider ecosystem and how the technology fits in that, rather than being led by the technology in many cases. So it needs a combination of experience of working on the ground with thinking about how different solutions will actually come into play, and that sometimes and it's that disconnect which is probably some of the biggest challenges as to why certain technologies aren't being deployed at the extent to which they could be. And obviously we can go into details or examples, but that's generally what we see. Yeah.
Kasey, how about you?
So for those that are interested in like investing in Village Book Builders, they want to see some of the same things that we're about. Obviously, they want to not so for some of our KPIs, for example, in Africa, there's a lot of dropouts, and we've seen that those that are engaged in our online mentoring program are excited to come to school and excited to stay in school. And so low dropout rates is one of our KPIs. Our investors, our donors, that's one thing really important to them. And obviously, I mentioned that with the test scores. So, for example, one of our schools, when they had their test scores, it was really low when we first started work with them. About a year or two after, their test scores actually tripled for the number of students that were able to pass the test scores and go on to a better secondary school. And so for our investors, they want to see that what we're doing is having an impact in the lives of those that we're mentoring. And so with these measurements of with English and dropouts, those are the main things that we focus on, but also the test scores. And so having that measurement in place is important to our investors, and it's nice to be able to show that on a basis. It's a direction that we can follow. It's a direction that we can show the donors why we chose that direction as well.
Right. So Kasey, are most of your investors, donors, like personal, as in personal? Are they doing it in personal capacity, or do you have like institutional investors who specialize in social impact?
Yeah, it's a little both. So most of our investors are donors, are volunteers, and so our volunteers, they donate their time, but also they are able to donate funds as well. We've recently been reaching out to a lot of corporations, and a lot of corporations are in need of social impact programs and virtual volunteer programs, and that fits really well with what we're doing. So all of our volunteers are virtual volunteers. And so Nike, for example, they promote our cause actively throughout their company, and with every employee that donates their time, Nike will match funds for donations, but also hours donated. And so we have a nice model of with having so many volunteers in place that provides a large donor pool, but also makes it so that we can explore different projects with the volunteers. Some of the volunteers, they're more they want to help a specific school or a specific region, and so with them being a part of the program, they can see the impact that it provides, and they're interested in helping out this particular school or this particular area. But the corporate partners that we have, they're it's been exciting. This is although COVID has had its challenges for sure with their programs, it also has opened up a lot of opportunities with the corporations, especially.
Well, absolutely. I think COVID has now shown that there's a lot more education that could still be delivered through sort of virtual medium. Shayonti, a question for you. So we've talked about challenges that we face in this space of technology convergence with social impact. What are some of your thoughts on what needs to change?
Well, I think as I just mentioned before, let me again just take a step back and say that the main mission is, if we look at the SDGs also, it is the concept of sustainability. Now, we are worried about how we can make the world more sustainable, but there are people who are almost not aware that A, what they are doing is not sustainable, B, what they were doing was sustainable. Now, for example, again, if I go back to the traditional weavers and artisans, when we have spoken to them, they were not at all aware that their traditional methods were so much more sustainable. And they felt that they had to transform their ways of working to match the requirement of the modern society, so to speak. So where I feel that technology needs to step up is in spreading this awareness and education. Now, once that is done, I think we will make a big leap towards the sustainable world that we are all striving for. Also, you know, it's a big thing now about fast fashion and slow fashion. Basically, fast fashion is, you know, we all know these big brands who often are sort of compromising on the business ethics. And the slow fashion is smaller entrepreneurs, SMEs who are working in much more eco-friendly manner and trying to make a social impact. Now, we can reduce the impact of fast fashion if technology can step up and reach out to let us say, the lesser qualified, unfortunately, people in villages across Asia and Africa. Like we have today, we have spoken a lot about, you know, African entrepreneurship and what is happening in Africa, etc. I think technology has a major role to play in giving these African artisans a chance to reach the global market. Like, I have been part of many mentorship programs, and when I have mentored, for example, I had an experience of mentoring a lady from Africa, and she was making some beautiful products, but she had absolutely no idea how she could reach out. I mean, the concept of an e-commerce marketplace was almost unknown to her. So, you know, I think that is where technology has to take a step back, and as we were discussing earlier, has to learn how to sort of spread the awareness and the information to absolutely the lowest level, to whom we are trying to impact, but somehow they get lost in the thing. You know, it's all about investments, it's all about technology, but the people who are supposed to be impacted by this technology have somewhat a very, very small role to play in this huge picture of decision making. And I think that is something where a lot yet needs to be done.
Thanks for sharing that, Shayonti. So David, looking at your area, you know, what would you say? What needs to change?
I think what needs to change, well, to take an example of something we're working on at the moment is with tree crops, so like macadamia or other nuts sort of things. If you look at what the entry level, so the minimum investment required for a completely inclusive farm with irrigation, processing, storage, route to market, etc., you might be looking at, say, $4 or $5 million for a 200 hectare farm. And that's clearly out of the reach of a small scale enterprise. So what's needed is, how can you create an enabling environment where smaller agripreneurs can have the routes to market, improve the production, have access to all the technology that is necessary in a way that's affordable. And this is in a way using a commercial model which is not promoting uneconomic farming. So it's still going to be around in 10, 20, 30 years, because in a crop like macadamia, you're thinking long-term, it's patient capital. And so what's needed is a means of using a core enterprise to be able to unlock the potential for thousands of other farmers on small enterprises. and be able to use a commercial model that really delivers the social impact, and to get that entry cost, that entry barrier way down, so you can have inclusive farming on a massive scale, and that's what our that's what we're working on as much as possible with many others.
Absolutely. Kasey, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, my answer will be a little shorter. If teachers receive better training, and if they were paid more, there wouldn't be such a gap that the lack of quality education is causing. That's the fourth sustainable development goal. There's for universal education, that's happening in Africa, but it's causing a negative effect in some countries where it's a lot more affordable for kids to go to school, but they're not receiving a high quality education in schooling, and that often because of teachers having 2 or 3 jobs just to afford their lifestyle. So, yeah.
Right. In fact, there was a session, actually a couple of sessions, which were there earlier. There was one that was talking about a certain fund, which is looking at skilling teachers in Africa, upgrading the skill sets of Africa, teachers in Africa. I think that's a very, very good initiative. So I'm just looking at the watch. So essentially, because right now you have a certain number of, I think you said 300 or 500 volunteers who are there. What are you seeing as the future trend? What is likely to happen in the next 2 to 5 years? That's probably going to rewrite, let's say, some of these sectors that we're talking about.
Yeah. So, what we're seeing in the Western world, of course, is more technology in the classroom. For my kids, for example, they're a 2nd and 3rd grader, and I'm surprised at how well they can use the computer, how well they can do a Google search. There's a little bit of a lag in Africa, of course, but Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, that'll be happening, and we're trying to bring it a little faster, bring computers and technology into the classroom. But that's definitely a trend, and it'll be a very positive trend as well. Helping kids become more savvy in the technology space will help these kids have more skills to be competitive in the working environment.
Right, and just staying on that with you, because you're covering a very niche area, and you are actually one of the service providers. How much of it is going to be technology, and how much of it is going to be social media? Because in order to get that sort of scale, it's not just having faster, better laptops, or you also need an equal amount of canvassing. So what would you say? How much of it's going to be one versus the other?
So if I understand right, are you talking about how we're bringing on more volunteers and
yes, more volunteers, more students using social media versus usage of technology in order to impart the actual education?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my hope is that social media doesn't grow as fast as with technology in the classroom. Of course, I definitely think there's a lot of negative that actually comes with the social media. But the positives is being able to reach a wide audience. And so for us, finding volunteers, social media is definitely a part of that. But I think for us, like what we're hoping is that more corporations see the value of having social impact goals, and if that's a real strong value of a corporation, I think more and more corporations will allow their employees to volunteer on the clock. They'll encourage their employees to spend more time, mentoring or being involved in other volunteer projects, and that's a very positive trend that I've seen, is that corporations are more involved in the social impact space, and I hope that convergence happens more. And when we talk about technology with Google, with Facebook, Microsoft, the more and more that they're involved with that, the faster we'll get to some of these goals that we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Kasey. Shayonti, what's your thought on some of the future trends that are going to impact this convergence in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think technology will have to step up in a way that the middleman concept somehow goes away, because I think technology has to enable the SMEs or small manufacturers in different countries where they can reach out to the global market on their own. I think still the situation is such they are dependent on facilitators and people in the middle, companies, organizations. And I think if technology will enable, like today, for example, you had one of the speakers who were, it's a big marketplace for sustainable accessories and products. What they are doing now, initially when they had started, they were only working with companies based in Europe. Now we see that very, very small SMEs based in Asia and Africa are coming onto their platform. So I think that is, again, I think what the role of technology should be is to remove this little screen in the middle and bring the supplier and the consumer much closer, and create more awareness so that social impact, sustainability are not simple trends and words to be just thrown around, but there is a real impact which we can see on the ground. Because still there is a lot of greenwashing, there is a lot of haziness around, which unfortunately I think it is because either the lack of accessibility towards the right kind of technology or the lack of awareness. So both of which are, I think, issues which we need to address going forward.
And that's nicely dovetails to my second question, which is technology versus social media. For your specific work, if you could just do a bit of a compare and contrast of the importance of each.
Well, social media, I think no matter how much, it's a love-hate relationship. We all say that we hate social media, but at the end of the day, for our respective businesses, we use social media. So I really cannot, through the crystal ball, see how long social media in this form is going to exist. But by the looks of it, I think it is going to be around for some time. So social media allows me to reach out to, let us say, my prospect clients, but technology allows me to convert. So I need technology to be up there on Google. I need technology to, using artificial intelligence when people are searching, that I pop up, I see. So I think it's going hand in hand. I cannot say that social media is not important, because at the end of the day, what is social media? It is, we have all these eyeballs together, and it is absolutely impossible to reach out that kind of to have that kind of a reach without social media. So, whatever we may say, it is important, and I think it will be relevant still for some time. But technology is what we need as businesses to sort of convert, to make to that last mile run, as they call it. So that is where we definitely need technology to work with, and to harness technology for going forward.
Excellent. And David, future trends in your space?
Sort of building on what Shayonti just mentioned, I think we see increasing sort of two-way visibility between the consumer and the producer. So one of our businesses, a herb business in Southeast Europe, we're not just looking at the quality of the product, but also how can we use the information of the individual farmer who produced it, how they can diversify and produce additional products as well. So there's a whole range of opportunities around in terms of innovation with that visibility, whether it's in terms of markets and payments and the product attributes themselves. And we also see a range of changes in the way things are financed and funded, particularly ways in which certain things haven't happened in the past because of perceived or actual risks, and the ways to de-risk those uses of new technologies, whether that's microinsurance or whether it's other types of interventions. But we do see things that haven't happened in the past will suddenly become possible because of the opportunity to de-risk de-risk them. So that's something which is going to be increasingly important.
Excellent. And how important is the role of social media in the work that you guys do?
For us, it varies a lot by types of crop. We tend to work with the higher value crops and not the commodity ones, which social media it has its use because it gets quite politicized, and we don't go into those political type crops. You're serving a particular niche product, so like shea butter, or we're working in herbs or other areas, the narrative around the product is particularly important, and the value that the customer or consumer place on being able to understand that and understand the production conditions, etc., is certainly important with social media. So it varies by location and crop, but we see it increasing in profile with a number of the high value type products we work with.
Excellent. And and literally I was looking at the watch, so we have come to the almost the end of the program. But before we leave, and this video is also going to be put up on YouTube, and it's the Facebook live feed is going to stay there on Facebook. So any final words of wisdom for the current and the future audience as well? David, we start with you. Yeah.
I'll start. Okay. I think the key thing is where does technology fit in the wider value chain, and seeing it as a enabler, but starting with the social impact you're wanting to focus on, and the technology coming after that, rather than the other way around. That would be my view. Yeah.
Excellent. Kasey, how about you? Any final words of wisdom?
I think it was Shayonti that said earlier, her hope is that social impact isn't just a trend, but actually becomes a part of us. And that's what our organization is really trying to achieve. Make it so that being a mentor, being a volunteer, helping someone becomes a true part of us, and not just a trend, or not just something we do a couple months out of the year. And so, what technology has enabled is for us to be involved in social impact on a regular basis. And so, my hope and my goal is that technology will continue to allow us to seek out the right social impact, programs or opportunities, and then be a part of them in full force.
Excellent, thank you, Shayonti. And now it's your turn. We'll end the session with your final words of wisdom.
Well, I think we are all very excited about making a social impact. So my request to consumers, to the audience at large, is that don't take it for granted that the product you're buying or the service you're taking is making a social impact. Use technology to find out what is actually happening behind the scenes. And there is ample technology available to do that. And it's only the consumer, the final consumer, that can really change and make the social impact happen. So they have to act more responsibly and not just accept what is being said.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully said. I think you've rounded off very, very well. Thank you, Shayonti, for that. So with that, I would like to bring a closure to the roundtable discussion here. I would like to thank David Lyon. I would like to thank Kasey Beck, and I would like to thank Shayonti Chatterji for joining us for this session. So with that, I would now hand it over to Devyani to actually bring about closure to our event today. Thank you.